As I said before, of course, I've talked about Looper at least once before when I did the verses with 12 Monkeys, but that video is like in really poor condition and I don't know much of anything that I said, but I do remember one thing, at least, because it's something that I hear almost, like it's the most common critique I hear about this movie ever since it came out, even still today, and that is that the first hour is like totally amazing and so inventive and really brings us into this certain new world, and just everything is so just rich in detail, and everything is like perfect. And then the farm scenes come along and it's like the not necessarily that they're bad, but it just seems to grind the movie to a halt, and it's just significantly less interesting than the first half until we get to the climax. And I was thinking about that, and then as this segment has shown, now that I've been going back and realizing that I love just about anything that Emily Blunt does, the first question that I had was, if I were to go back and watch Looper now, is it gonna be perfect? Is there gonna be no issues now? Well, let's start from the beginning and find out. Obviously, at the very start, just the one thing you sort of risk when you have a sci-fi movie like this, a really high concept thing, is that your exposition's going to be a little heavy, and you're going to maybe get a little too invested in it, and before you know it, like, the whole damn thing is going to be exposition because you have so much that you want to put into this world that you're building. But what Ryan Johnson did here is really nothing short of brilliant in how he handled this, because we are introduced to certain aspects of the world, some of which may be much more important than it seems as the movie goes on, like the introduction of telekinesis, which apparently people have now as sort of a mutation, but it's since sort of turned into a party trick, despite the fact that, as he said, they thought they were going to get superheroes, but it's basically just a bunch of douchebags showing off. And there's obviously going to be a lot of terminology, but like the title itself, where Joseph Gordon-Levitt's narration explains that to us as we're watching this happen. But there's also like the blunderbusses and stuff like that. But it's all done quite cleanly and quickly, and it doesn't like, it establishes it quickly so that it doesn't have to throughout the whole movie, which is great. And every now and then they might get a little carried away, like when when Seth accidentally lets his older self go, or not so accidentally, it's hard to tell, but and then Joseph Gordon-Levitt comes on and tells us through narration, this is called letting your loop run. And it's like, I don't think that's a term, dude. I think that's just what's happening. But whatever you want to do, however you want to do the world building thing, or make it sound more like that. But another reason that this introduction really works and all this stuff into all these different aspects of the world is that this movie is basically like a masterclass in montaging. Like, the editing just throughout is on point, but I mean specifically these montages where we make a point that would seemingly take like a whole lot of explaining and a whole lot of exposition, but to just do it really quickly, but also really energetically, and really give the movie life through these montages, and not just make them feel like we're just trying to rush so we can get to certain parts, like many montages feel like. Particularly, they really show this off well when we see the whole 30 years of Joe being Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and then all the way up to him being Bruce Willis, to getting in the time machine and coming back, and this whole thing. And how they, like, and that's the thing, too, is when you pack in, like, that much, where it's done so well, where we see, when it circles back around, we see what we already saw the first time, only in the first time we saw it in close-up, and then the second time we see him at a distance. Just clever things like that to make it feel like it's not redundant while showing us all this again. But the great thing here also is that, and you can tell that the editing is so well done, is the fact that you really run a high risk in regards to pacing, showing us as much as you do in this in so little time. Where, like, when we see that whole 30-year montage, it's probably, what, 2 or 3 minutes? At least that's what it feels like. But it feels like we have seen so much in that point. Like, it feels like a large chunk of time should have passed when it's only been like maybe 2 or 3 minutes of actual movie time. And when you have continuous scenes like this, especially through montage, there's a big risk that it's going to feel like the movie has been on a lot longer than it actually has, thus making it feel like the pacing is off and it's going to feel long. But no, they find a way to just continuously do this to where, like, each scene is like hit after hit after hit, to where that once again, all the way up to the farm pretty much, the movie just moves like an absolute bullet. And so that's always something I really appreciate about this, especially when it comes to introducing us to a world that has so many different details that we have to know throughout for a lot of the movie to make sense from beginning to end. And then, of course, we've got the idea of... Well, there's a great piece of casting here in regards to having Bruce Willis and Joseph Gordon-Levitt play these characters. There were some question marks raised about the idea of making Joseph Gordon-Levitt look a little like him, through these prosthetics, and they had initially considered going with like CGI of sorts, but it is better that they went with the prosthetics, as weird as they might look sometimes. Interestingly enough, the prosthetics actually look a lot better in close-up than they do from a distance. And there are some of these cases where you can tell it's like... It feels a bit stilted, where it's almost like Gordon-Levitt trying to do an impression of him visibly. Particularly, like, the way he laughs in the Jeff Daniels scene, the first Jeff Daniels scene has always kind of bothered me. But then you have scenes like when he's at the dining room table with Sid, once he's on the farm, and he's like pretty much being interrogated by him, and it's a lot more effortless. Like, he does actually sound like Willis, and it does feel like it's just sort of naturally coming out of him, and this really does seem like it could be a young Bruce Willis for real. So that's where a lot of the strengths in Gordon-Levitt's performance is. He does have, like... He may not have, like, as much emotion, but that's also just part of the character, obviously. He's got to have that coldness about him for it to be believable that he does the things that he does. But there's also, you know, there's little moments in there where it's like he's clearly got mother issues of some kind. But where there is a certain humanity that he finds in there, but doesn't cross the line too much, because then that would almost seem out of character if he did. Also, he's a junkie, which goes into that also. But there's also a whole nice supporting cast here before we go into the likes of Blunt. Starting with, one of my favorite characters is always Abe, the Jeff Daniels character, where he's like this very, very relaxed crime boss. He's always in his damn robes. But there's something just so, like, his comfort is so threatening at the same time, too. And there's that particular, I think, once again, it's the first scene, when he's talking to Joe and he's saying, like, yeah, we're not gonna, you know, we need you to give up Paul Dano because we're not gonna, like, you know, break your fingers or anything like that. We're not doing anything drastic. And as he's saying this, as calmly as he is, his hammer is clearly sitting out on the desk. It's covered by, like, one sheet of paper, but it's still very visible. The hammer that he later uses on Kid Blue. And that's just sort of a consistent throughout. It's one of those cases where you feel like he's in it more than he actually is, because the small screen time that he has is so impactful because of what he's able to do with it. And going on that also, the idea of this Kid Blue character that's like the dude that's basically like the loose cannon. He thinks he's the ultimate badass, but he's really like this clumsy idiot. And the thing here though is there was always that theory that I had heard about is Kid Blue the younger version of Abe, because Abe is obviously from the future, as we know. And it feels like there's plenty of clues to this. I'm not quite sure. I look every time I watch it, and it's like I'm trying to see if there's like anything that might contradict this, and there's probably a couple things here and there, like maybe an injury that Kid Blue suffers that we don't know about, because obviously Abe like kind of has that limp that we see every now and then, and obviously we know that Kid Blue accidentally blew a foot off once. The more obvious things like that, but then there's stuff like just through the whole movie, a lot of Noah Segan's performance really is when he's going at, like when he's really trying to prove himself to Abe in these ways where whenever he fails, it's like his world's coming apart. It's like it's like the most like emotionally broken down you've seen a henchman in an action sci-fi movie. And then there's just little things in there like when after he's been scolded, when he's kind of trying to enter the conversation, Abe just kind of looks at him and tears him down and says, "Be quiet, the grown-ups are talking." And just how offended he looks by that. And it sort of reminds me of the same way when they're in the diner and old Joe calls Joe boy and like puts a lot of emphasis on it to show he's the younger one and doesn't know anything. And there was always something like really similar in feel to that to me when the grown-ups are talking line that Abe gives to Kid Blue. So I'm sure like a super fan of the movie can contradict it in some way or maybe further prove it. But I do also kind of like that, as far as I know, it's not really something that's been, like, addressed by Rian Johnson or anything. So it's something that can just linger there, like I said, unless it can be contradicted in a way I'm not thinking of. But then also we have another person that you kind of think of, that you think they're in it more than they are because of the impact they leave, and that's, of course, Paul Dano, who's only in this for, like, maybe 5 or 10 minutes at the very beginning. But really leaving this big impression where he starts off as just, you know, one of those douchebags that uses telekinesis to impress people. And he's really obsessed with his bike. His very first scene, he's threatening to blow a dude away for getting close to it. He's just that guy. But then it ends up being that he pretty much sets the tone for the entire movie in regards to the emotional core of it. Because I believe Rian Johnson said that they shot Paul Dano's scenes really early, so the emotion that he shows in that scene when he's getting ready to hide in the trapdoor is kind of what, you know, set the emotional tone of the movie and what he based the rest of what he shot on. And that really goes on way. And then of course that takes us into the terrifying scene where he is captured and killed. When they decide that they can't catch the older Seth, so they're going to track him down by lopping off the body parts of the younger one so that they disappear on him, and then luring him to where he can be shot and his body taken. And that's the thing, that exemplifies one of the many things that sort of annoys me when I hear people talk about this movie, especially if they're looking for criticism. And that is the fact that a lot of people try to explain away things very quickly with these very sort of mundane statements about, oh, why didn't you just do this or whatever. And it's like, the thing that I love about Johnson's approach to this movie is that he really goes for, like, the dramatic effect, where you don't take the easy way because what's thrilling about that? And this movie is like nothing but thrilling, so you could say, like, why didn't they just, you know, when they had younger Seth, why didn't they just shoot him? That would have done away with the older Seth. They wouldn't have even had to find him. He would just fucking vanish. But it's like that they went that sadistic extra mile to do what they did, to almost like make an example of him. And you can tell, because another example of this would be, clearly there's some sort of example here, because you look at the scene when old Joe looks at his arm and sees the Beat on his arm that we saw earlier with Seth, and we knew that that meant certain doom, because the place he was supposed to be at was where he was shot and killed, and his body was dragged away after it had been torn apart. But there's that dramatic effect where we have that feeling of, oh God, that Joe does also. We recognize the look on his face like he knows what that means. But then, of course, it's revealed that it was Beatrix, the Tracy Thoms character, and it was the signal to go to the diner. Now, of course, they already make the joke where they say, you do realize there is a waitress that works here with a much shorter name that's got like 3 letters. But even though young Joe didn't remember that woman right away, he still could have just put diner, which is still many less letters than Beatrix, but it's like, it really pays off to just have that dramatic moment, whether you can, you know, go around it or not. Just that feeling we had of dread when he saw the first 4 letters on his arm is what we're here for. I mean, it's like it's like when they talk about like, and the way they dismiss that also, the way they just completely throw away the all the mechanics of the time traveling, and they're like, you know, we're not going to go into that shit because we'd be here all day, and it's like, that's not what this movie is. That is not the story of this movie, is to dissect fucking time travel for 3 damn hours. It's a 2-hour movie with its own whole story here, with its own mechanics towards time travel that you just have to accept. Because if you go into this as one of those people where you're like, oh, well, when they, you know, transfer them by way of time, when they like teleport them through time, why don't they just put them in space? That'll kill them. We don't have to worry about loopers. And it's like, you have no interest in this movie, do you? if that's what you think when you hear this concept, and it's like, oh, it'd be that easy. Okay, who wants to fucking see that movie? And there are so many scenes in this movie that we would not have that are, like I said, the whole point that we're here is to be thrilled by this movie, and this movie has so much to offer in dramatic, you know, details like that, and where they don't take the easy way out. Or they avoid something so that they can do something that cinematically is so much better. And it's like I said, if you're one of those people where all you want to do is just diagnose the time travel mechanics, then something tells me that's all you're here to do. That's the only reason you watch Back to the Future or any other thing, or the Time Machine movie with Rod Taylor or whatever. And it's like, you're not interested in the story at all, are you? So, best not to critique the whole movie based on that. That's the way I handle that anyway. But so anyway, once we've gone through this whole first half, yes, we do eventually end up on the farm with Emily Blunt, as Sarah with her kid, I guess we'll say, Sid. And the interesting thing about that I actually really liked upon revisiting is the sort of breathing period that we have when there's been so, like I was talking about, the montaging and just the constant energy, the really strong violence, the chase sequences, all this stuff. And yeah, it is easy to see how it feels like you kind of hit a brick wall when you just, the movie's so energetic, you kind of just want it to keep going. But we do have this breathing period where there's the contrast of when we get to the farm, and it's like so like quiet. There's just this stillness and this tranquility. And it's just her sitting on her porch, and it's like we just sense like the loneliness here and just the quietness of it all. And there's also an effect to that because we know that all the crazy shit in the first half is going to bleed into this quiet tranquility that's going on eventually. Which makes the climax all the more strong, too, when we get there. So, and then obviously we learn that she's basically got this shotgun practically glued to her hands. And she goes, and when she does, you know, the "I'll cut you the fucking half" line, which, once again, I was pretty much dismissive. I just said I thought she was doing a weird southern accent, and then I dismissed her entirely. But there is something here to where she just instantly has that reaction to anybody that's approaching this place, and it's and there's seemingly a possible reason for that, on top of the fact that it's just like it's almost like she's prepared to match the first half of the movie, and that she's definitely got something like inside her that's hidden by like the overall peacefulness that we thought we were seeing before. And there is, I guess I can go ahead and go into that. There was this whole thing about a theory that I think Rian Johnson, I think he like addressed it, but he was like real cryptic about it. Where we go into the whole thing of Sid talking about how Sarah is not his actual mother, and that she was killed when he had this, you know, telekinetic tantrum or whatever. Something similar to Garrett Dillon's death scene. And so she basically took him in as, and acted as his mother, to just show him love, and thinking that she could calm down these tantrums of his if she just, you know, gave him a mother's love, more or less. Well, apparently the theory is that she's well aware of the fact that she's from the future, actually, and she's been sent here, much similar to like the way Abe was, to just look after his part of the city, but she was sent here to basically look after him, to make sure, to shower him with love, so that he doesn't become the Rainmaker. And it's because obviously the story sets it up that what makes him the Rainmaker is seeing Sarah killed. But then there's this whole other theory where it could be that whole thing where she's actually here to prevent that, and that could be another reason that it's believable of why she's so protective of anything and everything, knowing that there will be people coming to kill him once they figure it out. Why she's so protective of him also. But I do want to go more into that, but before we do, I also mentioned that I do like the way Sid is revealed into the story. How when we see the future scenes, the Rainmaker is like this unseen force, more or less. And the fact that they sort of foreshadow that with, well, we sort of know it pretty fast, but it's a bit of foreshadowing where it's like the first couple of times we see Sid when he's introduced, they keep his face hidden. Like the first time it's just her waking him up and we just see like his leg, and then when he walks up to Joe, we see like everything but like he's cut off at like the neck by the frame. So I like the way they just sort of took a little bit, just a couple of scenes to reveal him in that way, to sort of keep that, you know, sort of mysterious presence that he would have in the future also, I think is a really nice detail. But then going on what Blunt is able to bring to the table in this, to where we won't just dismiss it as the boring-ass farm scenes until Garrett Dillahunt comes in, or the climax, or whatever. There is something here where it sort of is interesting in regards to the potential theory that she could be from the future trying to stop him with just love. Because there's definitely, like, a genuine, like, fear and heartache simultaneously when it comes to dealing with him. To where the love here is genuine. Like, it doesn't feel like it's, like, some job she's been sent on or anything. To the point that she has that moment that's so heartbreaking where she has to lock herself inside a safe to make sure she doesn't get killed when he's having a tantrum. And we just see, like, this combination of fear and heartache in her to where it's, like, it pains her to have to be this afraid of him because of the love that's actually there. And that love and protection from her, like, feels so incredibly real through the performance herself. Like, even talking about not just whether or not, you know, Sarah has another motive or whatever, but Blunt's performance itself really makes this come through. And there's the whole sort of complication of, you know, whatever truth she may know, and then how she plays off of that towards what the scenes require. And it's like there is something very knowing about her, like when she goes through her actions, but also the way she carries herself. How, like, she has this look in her eyes a lot of the time where it's like you can just, like, her eyes see so far, and it's just really, the layers are definitely in there. And then there's also the going on to the theory also, when I was talking about when she's on the front porch just kind of sort of basking in that tranquility, but there's also like a loneliness factor, or like a longing for another person or something. And she's doing the pantomiming of the cigarette, and it's like, your first thought is like, oh, God bless her, she's trying to quit smoking. But then there's the whole following scene after the sex scene, when she's pretty much doing the exact same movements with her hands, like she senses that future that will be happening, that she knows when the person that's coming that could potentially stop all of this. So there is definitely something there, and the way that it doesn't feel like it's part of the story that Joe should feel a connection to her, because obviously a lot of action movies or sci-fi movies or whatever have the issue of just shoehorning in, like, if you have a male protagonist and then a female character comes into the movie at like the midway point, there's gonna have to be some connection because screenwriting 101 or something. But the fact that it actually has a point here where his whole emotional connection, like, even if it's not love, there's still an emotional connection, particularly in her monologue in that scene where she's, you know, showing off her telekinesis and smoking and all that, which is that connection that Joe makes that ultimately makes him make the decision that he does. And then, like I said, that's where that sort of emotion comes in also, and there's that sort of just genuine way about it. There is also, like, the whole thing of, should she be from the future? And we are going with that theory. It's like, if Sid should be killed, really her job is done because the Rainmaker still isn't going to happen. But the fact that there is that just real, genuine care for him, like when she's out there, and then the big moment when he actually accepts her and like calls her mom and all that, and it's like there's plenty of reasons you could dismiss that theory altogether for sure. It really, adding it up, it really probably could go either way, but and the fact that either works is perfectly fine. But like I said, we don't even know if that theory is bullshit or not. But there is a lot that adds up to it, and it gives Blunt just even more to do as a performance, and she's absolutely gonna bring it just in every single moment. But there's also there's a little something there where I feel like we maybe go a little too much, like the inexplicable sex scene. I guess it's not really a sex scene because it's implied, but still it's heavily implied, and to the point that, like, I mean, obviously being, you know, alone on that farm, and we get that sense of just how long she's been alone. Yeah, she's gonna be lonely and horny and all that, and she's like, obviously we get the moment where she's about to take care of herself before she remembers there's a dick in the house now. But the weird thing about that is that I felt like it's, despite that, I was talking about that connection that makes Joe make the decisions that he does after he finds that connection, especially through his mother issues and all that. But the whole thing, and there's obviously going to be a parallel here with the Piper Perabo character, but the thing here is that I felt like the point was made just through her monologue by itself. The sex scene seems a little bit like not really something that's necessary, because this is a movie that's like all about, you know, getting down to the story and cutting out the bullshit. That's why we went through, that's why there's so many great montages. That's why he talked about at the beginning, like, we're not even going to go into the time travel bullshit because it'll be too complicated. And it's like, for a movie that's all about cutting down the bullshit we really don't need, and there's, you know, quite a few decent deleted scenes even that could have been here instead of the build-up sex or whatever. So that's always kind of stuck out to me in a weird way that I felt was kind of like something we didn't really need. But yeah, so, but, and as I was saying, especially since the pacing certainly slows down quite a bit once we've gotten to this point, and then comes back to life with the appearance of Garrett Dillahunt, where who obviously not only has a very memorable, intense scene, but also a very memorable, intense death scene as well, prompting Blunt to give one of the probably best deliveries ever in a movie of, oh my god. And she's not even on screen when she says it, we just hear it from the inside, when it's implied what it looks like in there afterwards. And yeah, and then as I said, we go into our climax, and it really goes in this emotional direction, which, like I said, was set off by Dano, and then further carried on by Blunt. And then we eventually get to this point where Willis gets big emotional scenes when he realizes he has to start killing children. And we think he's going to be like this sort of heartless killing machine, despite the fact that we've seen the whole way he's gotten here, where he lost the woman that he loved and all that, and he's driven by that. But he gets that moment where he kills that first kid, and then he just really, really breaks down. And it's a way that it's an investment in Bruce Willis in a role that we haven't seen for a while. We hadn't seen for a while at the time, and we haven't really seen in a while since. And I remember him telling, like, Rian Johnson and Kevin Smith were talking about, because Kevin Smith infamously had a lot of issues working with Bruce Willis. And Smith asked Rian Johnson about it, and he was like, when we did Looper, he was great. And it's like, we basically came to the conclusion that he knows if the project is like top quality and like really worth doing, then he will invest in it. That's why all the shitty direct-to-video stuff he does, he just sleepwalks through. It's like he saw Looper, and even he was like, I can't half-ass this. I have to give my all into this. And it's really some of the best stuff he's done, at least in this decade. So, and that's, obviously that bar is not very high, but it's definitely worth noting. And that's also interesting that he's basically like, there is so much emotion behind them that we do understand, yet it's so, like, the pieces did just come together naturally to where he comes off as the villain of the climax, pretty much, where he's the threat. And it's like how we've somehow seamlessly gotten to really feeling for him and seeing him in such an emotional state, to then see him being this almost emotionless killing machine once he's over that. Especially when he's in like Abe's lair and all that. It's a really interesting performance from him. So, and then yes, we get to the conclusion where Joe decides that if he kills himself, he can make older Joe disappear, and none of this will happen. Sarah won't be killed, hence the Rainmaker won't happen. And so this is like, once again, you can go on like all day about all the different things this would have changed, and it's like, you know, did it stop the Rainmaker from existing? Is there something else that could provoke that? But it's like, the last shot of the movie is him sleeping soundly, and we know that he's got a mother's love forever, and it's like, what more implication do you need? I understand if you want to leave a movie with questions, even if the movie's not particularly asking them, but yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward, and I do think it's a very nicely well done ending that really ties everything up nicely. And yeah, it could be like, well, who's then still alive now? Who's still doing whatever they were doing before? But it's like, as long as the characters that we know are going to be okay, and by all implications the movie is saying that they are, that's all I could really ask from this ending. So I've always been satisfied by the ending, but I always thought everything just came together pretty much nicely, and how Johnson was able to just meticulously get all this together in just the right way in this script. I can only imagine how long and how much of a thought-provoking process it was to put this thing together from the bottom to the top, but it's really, really damn impressive. So that's where I lie here. I've always loved this, and I'm glad that it just seems to kind of get better too, as I see it. So there we are. I think next we're going to go into. I'm not quite sure what the order is. I've got it written down somewhere. So until the next one, that's it for this.